They left her for dead in the snow. A broken radio. One bullet left. No backup. The storm was supposed to bury the truth along with her. From the ridge above, enemy units moved in, confident, careless. They didn't know she was still breathing. Didn't know she had already mapped every shadow, every footstep, every gap between heartbeats. Didn't know that being left behind was the one condition under which she was most dangerous. By dawn, the snow would be silent again, not because the storm had passed, but because no one was left alive to make a sound. The briefing room smelled like coffee gone cold and men who hadn't slept. Captain Derek Halstead spread the topographic map across the folding table and pressed both palms flat against it, as if he could hold the terrain in place by force of will. Outside, the wind off the Alaskan range hit the prefab walls in long, rolling surges. Snow tapped the high window like something patient and persistent, something that had all the time in the world. Recon sweep, grid Delta 7. The pass narrows at the second ridge. You come in from the east, stay above the tree line, and you do not engage unless engaged first. He traced the route with one finger. Intel puts a cell of 6 to 10 armed individuals operating out of a decommissioned relay station. Purpose unknown. Armament unknown. Sergeant First Class Elena Voss stood at the back of the room. She had her arms crossed, not in hostility but in the way of someone who had learned to conserve heat wherever she found herself. Her gear was already staged by the door. She had been the first one in and would be the last one out, and she was the only person in the room who had already memorized the map. The team was 6. Halstead, who commanded, Staff Sergeants Brett Connolly and Marcus Ewan, Corporals James Dufresne and Philip Tate, and Elena. She was the only designated marksman in the group. She was also the only woman, a fact that had not gone unacknowledged since the unit assembled 4 days ago at the forward operating base outside Fairbanks. Connolly had made his position clear on the first day. He was broad across the shoulders and carried himself like a man who expected the world to step aside. No offense, he'd said, though he clearly intended some, but long-range support on a 6-man team in mountain terrain is a liability, not an asset. You slow us down, we all go home in bags. He'd said it with his eyes on Halstead, not on Elena, which was its own kind of dismissal. Elena had said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Now, in the briefing room, Halstead finished his overview and looked around the table. Questions? Yeah. Connolly leaned back in his chair. I want to go over the extraction window again, because if conditions deteriorate past the forecast threshold, we lose air support and we're walking back. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that wasn't entirely tactical. Some of us more slowly than others. A few sets of eyes moved toward Elena. She was already looking at the map. Tate, 23 and newer than the others, watched her from across the table. She noticed him watching. She did not acknowledge it. After the briefing broke, while the others pulled on base layers and ran final weapon checks, Tate drifted toward her corner of the room. He had the look of someone trying to decide whether to say something useful or something kind, and not yet knowing the difference. You good? He said. Yes. Connolly's just, I know what he is. She settled the rifle's strap across her chest and checked the scope adjustment with 2 fingers. It doesn't matter. Tate opened his mouth, closed it, then said, You been in weather like this before? She looked at him then, briefly. I've been in worse. Outside, the wind answered for her. The insertion was routine. Halstead ran a clean column up the eastern slope, pacing the team to the terrain and the cold. Elena positioned herself at the natural drag, as marksman doctrine required, maintaining spacing and watching their back trail. The tree line gave way to open granite and packed snow. The sky was iron gray, the kind of color that meant the storm forecast for evening might arrive early. Connolly set the pace up front. Too fast. Elena noted it and said nothing. Speed in mountain terrain was a trap. It elevated core temperature, triggered sweat, and sweat in sub-freezing conditions became a clinical problem within the hour. She kept her own pace, even, controlled, conserving what she would need later. Dufresne fell back alongside her around the first hour mark. He was quiet, watchful, and she had decided early that he was the most professional among the group. He's pushing it, Dufresne said, nodding toward the lead. Yes, he does it when he's uncomfortable. Dufresne adjusted his pack. He thinks momentum means control. Elena said nothing. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Dufresne said. She glanced at him. There was no hostility in his face, only something that looked like cautious curiosity. Make what easy? Being evaluated. I'm not being evaluated, she said. We're on a reconnaissance operation in deteriorating weather. There's nothing easy about it regardless. Dufresne almost smiled. Fair. They climbed. By the time the team reached the ridgeline approach, the light had shifted from gray to white gray, the specific colorlessness of a sky about to commit to something severe. Halstead raised his fist. The column stopped. He pulled binoculars and glassed the valley below. Elena was already looking through her scope. The relay station sat in a bowl between 2 ridges, half buried in drifted snow, its antenna array dark. But the snow around the structure was disturbed. Recent tracks, multiple boot prints, a trail leading northwest along the valley floor toward a second structure she hadn't seen on the satellite imagery. 6 visible, she said quietly. Halstead lowered his binoculars. Where? 2 at the main structure. 2 moving along the north tree line, heading west. 1 stationary at the antenna array. One more. She paused, adjusting. Prone position. Eastern boulder field. He's watching the approach. Silence. How long have you been reading that? Connolly said. She didn't answer. The answer was obvious. Halstead studied the valley a moment longer. We hold here. I'm calling it back to command. He keyed the radio. Static. He tried again. More static. He adjusted the frequency and tried a third time. Nothing. The storm had arrived early. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously, which told Elena 2 things before the first shot finished echoing off the ridge walls. First, these men had done this before. Second, they had known the team was coming. The opening burst of fire came from the boulder field to the east, where Elena had spotted the prone figure. It was suppressive, intended to drive the team flat and break formation, not to kill cleanly. The second element opened from the northern tree line. The 2 figures she had tracked moving west had doubled back and taken elevated positions. The third element came from somewhere below and to the south, a position that should have been behind the team's line of march. Should have been. She dropped to the snow the moment the first shot broke, rolling left behind a granite outcropping. Instinct and training, working faster than thought. Halstead's voice on the radio cut in and out. Contact east and north, suppress and static ate the rest. Connolly was already moving. He was good in firefights, she had to concede that. He moved with authority, pulling Tate with him toward a low berm of packed snow and stone. Dufresne went flat and returned fire toward the tree line. Short controlled bursts, buying seconds. UN went down in the first 30 seconds. She saw it from her position. He took a round in the upper left chest and went backward into the snow, landing hard, not moving. She could not reach him, she assessed. Eastern shooter. Established position. Good cover. Disciplined trigger. He was the anchor. The other elements were maneuvering around him. Northern pair. Now at roughly 280 meters. Moving in coordinated bounding. One moving while one covered. Trained. Southern element. Still unknown in number. Between the team and the extraction route, Halstead was trying to consolidate. Voss. Voss? Do you have the eastern? Yes, she said. On my mark, we break south. South is compromised. A pause. A long one. How many? Unknown. At least 2. Another pause. She could hear the calculus running. We break west. Tree line. Go on my. The concussive pressure of a near miss cut him off. Someone on the northern element had upgraded from suppressive to targeted. They had found Halstead's position. Go, he shouted. West, now. The team broke. Connolly and Tate moved fast. Dufresne dragged UN, which slowed him, but he didn't leave the man. Halstead moved last, covering. Elena moved west and slightly north, not directly west with the others. She needed elevation. She needed 15 seconds and a clear line to the eastern anchor, who would reposition the moment the team broke to pursue. Without eliminating the anchor, whoever was still standing after the first 100 meters of open ground would be cut down before they reached the trees. She found the elevation, a rock shelf, 3 feet high. Enough. She settled the rifle, controlled her breathing despite the cold and the adrenaline, found the eastern position through the scope. The figure was moving, repositioning to pursue, exactly as she had predicted. She fired. The figure went still. One shot, clean, but the movement had cost her time and position. She was now exposed on the open shelf, separated from the team by 30 meters of open ground. She turned and ran, and the fire that came was immediate and concentrated, and it came from the south, from the compromised position she had warned about, and the round that found her didn't penetrate her plate carrier took it, but the force of it at a dead run in snow-covered terrain sent her sideways and down the slope. She fell for a long time. The snow received her without ceremony. She heard Tate's voice on the radio, distant and crackling. Voss is down. She's gone off the south slope. I don't static. She's gone. Then nothing. The storm closed in above her like a door. She did not know how long she was unconscious. When awareness returned, it came in pieces. Cold first. Absolute and surrounding, the kind that wasn't felt as sensation anymore but as simple fact. Then, the weight of snow on her back, her legs, one arm. Then the pain in her left shoulder where the fall had been interrupted, violently, by something that was either rock or frozen root. She did not move immediately. This was training. This was years of being taught that the first instinct, panic, motion, noise, was the most dangerous thing available. She listened. Wind, distance. The wind moved through the rock formation above her in long, organ pipe tones. Beneath it, nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no radio, no shots. She was under the snow. Not deep, she could feel the slight give above her, but covered enough. She moved her fingers first. Both hands, both sets of fingers. The right hand responded well. The left was slower, the shoulder injury telegraphing its subjection. Not dislocated, bruised, possibly cracked in the clavicle region. Functional. She worked herself free of the snow with deliberate slowness, coming up on her right elbow, then her knees, scanning before she rose fully. The light was wrong. Flatter. The storm had arrived in full, visibility down to maybe 50 meters in the valley below. She was on the south slope, well below the ridgeline. Above her, The fight had ended. Below her, the valley was silent. She took inventory. Primary rifle, still on her. She'd kept her grip through the fall, which she felt some distant satisfaction about. 1 magazine remaining, she checked. 7 rounds. The round she'd fired at the eastern anchor had come from a partial magazine. 1 partial magazine. 7 rounds. Secondary, a compact sidearm with a single full magazine. Radio. She pulled it from its mount and keyed the transmit. Nothing. The housing was cracked on one side, the antenna bent at a 30-degree angle. Possibly still functional at very short range. Not useful now. Medical. She did a rapid self-assessment. Left shoulder compromised but operational. A cut above her right ear. Shallow. Already beginning to freeze over. Both legs functional. Core temperature acceptable. She was cold, but controlled cold. She studied the terrain. She had fallen roughly 40 meters down the south slope from the team's last position. The ambush kill zone was above her. The team had broken west. She did not know if any of them had made it. She did not allow herself to spend time on that question. She knew 2 things with clarity. The southern element that had shot her had not come down the slope after her. Either they assumed she was dead, or they had more pressing priorities. Either way, she had a window. She pressed her back against the rock face and looked south, then east, then west along the slope. The snow was coming harder now. Visibility dropping. Temperature dropping. She placed her right hand flat on the snow beside her and held it still. After a moment she felt it, a faint, rhythmic compression. Not wind. Not settling snow. Footsteps. Moving south to north along the valley floor, 200 meters below her. Moving in groups. More than 2. She counted the compression intervals. 3 people. Possibly 4. Moving steadily. Moving with purpose. Not searching. Consolidating. She understood, then, with the particular clarity that comes when the body's peripheral chaos has been stripped away by cold and isolation. The ambush had been a collection operation. They were gathering their dead, their equipment, their documentation. They intended to leave no trace, which meant they intended to leave no one alive to report what had happened here. She adjusted the rifle strap across her right shoulder, kept her left arm close to her body, and began moving west along the slope, staying below the ridgeline, invisible in the storm. She was not running, she was hunting. She moved west for 20 minutes before she found Corporal Philip Tate. He was alive. That surprised her. He had wedged himself into a shallow rock cleft at the edge of the tree line, face down, both hands pressed against his thigh where a field dressing was already soaking through. He heard her approach. She let him hear her. A deliberate scuff of boot on rock and his sidearm came up fast. She stepped into his line of sight, both hands visible. He lowered the weapon. The relief on his face was unguarded and exhausted. "You're alive," he said. "Yes, we thought," Connolly said. Connolly was wrong. She knelt beside him and examined the wound. Through and through, upper thigh, medial side, not arterial. He'd applied pressure correctly. "You can walk." "Yeah." He looked at his own leg with the expression of a man taking inventory of damage he hadn't fully processed. "Where are the others?" "Unknown." She said it without inflection and watched him absorb it. To his credit, he did not fall apart. He pressed his lips together and nodded once, slowly. "How many of them are there?" he said. "At least 8. Possibly 10. They move like contracted military. Not irregular." She was looking at the tree line as she spoke, watching the shadow patterns. "They knew our route." "What?" "They were in position before we arrived. The ambush was staged, not reactive." She paused. "Someone gave them our operational plan." Tate was quiet for a moment. "Halstead? You think?" "I don't know." She didn't. Halstead had run a clean briefing, by the numbers, no deviation. But clean briefings had been compromised before. It could be further up the chain. The routing, the grid designation, the timing window, any of those pieces, in the right hands, would have been enough. Tate looked at the valley. "What do we do?" Elena thought about this for exactly as long as it required. "You stay here," she said. "Keep pressure on that wound. Don't use the radio unless you hear voices within 50 meters. If I'm not back before the storm breaks, start moving east along the slope and keep moving. And if you don't come back," she stood. "Then you were right not to wait." She moved into the trees before he could respond. The forest changed everything. Inside the tree line, the wind dropped and the snow became a fine, drifting curtain rather than a driving wall. She could see 30, 40 meters in the relative shelter of the spruce canopy. She could hear better. She could think better. She moved east, parallel to the valley floor but elevated, using the trees as concealment. She needed to establish the enemy's current disposition before she did anything else. She needed to know how many, where they were clustered, what they were protecting or collecting, and where their command element was positioned. She found the first answer a quarter mile in. 2 men at a temporary position folded tarp over a low frame. A small heater unit, a radio setup that included equipment she didn't recognize at first and then did. It was a communications jammer, broadband, military grade, the kind of unit that required significant funding and supply chain access. Not something an irregular cell acquired easily. This was confirmed funding, confirmed infrastructure. She marked their position in her memory and moved south. She found what she was looking for near the old relay station. The structure had been cleared. Inside, through a window that had been taped over but imperfectly, she could see movement and light. 4 men, a table with documents spread across it, and a man standing over the table with the posture of someone who was accustomed to being the person in the room that mattered most. Kamal. She studied him through the scope at a distance that kept her invisible. 50, possibly 55. Short, iron gray hair cut close. He moved with precision, with economy, without any gesture that was not deliberate. He pointed at the documents and spoke, and the others listened. When he was finished, 2 of them left immediately, taking a direction that would lead them south, toward where she had last seen Tate. She turned and moved faster than she had moved since the slope. She beat them by 4 minutes. She knew this because she heard their voices when she was still 150 meters out, moving back through the trees toward Tate's position, and she calculated their pace and direction and arrived at his cleft in the rocks with time to spare. Not much time. Move, she said quietly. East, now. Shallow. Tate understood from her voice that the instruction was not a suggestion. He got up, favoring the wounded leg but moving, and she positioned herself in the shadows of the tree line at the place they had just vacated. The 2 men came through the trees with professional spacing 10 meters between them, one moving while the other watched, leapfrogging forward. They were looking for survivors, specifically for this spot. They had a direction and a grid, which meant they had either tracked her fall from the ridge or they had better intelligence than she wanted to consider. She waited. The doctrine was always to wait longer than instinct demanded. Instinct said, move now, shoot now, take the shot while you have it. Doctrine said wait until you could guarantee the outcome with certainty. These were not the same thing. The forward man came to within 20 meters of her position and stopped. He'd seen the disturbed snow where Tate had been lying. He raised his hand and the rear man froze. Forward man went to one knee, studying the ground. He would read it correctly: compression from a body, boot prints leading east, blood trace. He keyed his radio. He was already moving through the scope, shifting to the rear man who was in the more exposed position, no cover to his immediate left or right. She fired. She moved immediately, 2 steps left, before the echo finished. The forward man was on his feet, scanning, rifle up. He had not processed where the shot had come from. He pivoted toward the sound of the echo, away from her new position. She fired again, 6 rounds remaining. She went to ground and stayed absolutely still for 90 seconds, listening. No additional footsteps. No radio chatter she could hear. She moved to the forward man's body and took his weapon, a compact carbine, 3 magazines, approximately 90 rounds, and his radio. She tested the radio in receive mode. Voices. She couldn't make out all of it through the interference of the jammer, but she heard enough. A call. And response pattern. Men checking in. A schedule. She had their communications protocol now. She stripped the men of anything useful, covered what she could not take with snow, and moved back toward Tate. He'd made good distance east. She found him 200 meters from the original position, pressing on despite the leg. 2 down, she said, falling in beside him. Tate looked at her, then at the carbine she was now carrying. You went back. I needed the equipment. He was quiet for a moment. What's the plan? Reduce their operational capacity before their extraction window. When is their extraction window? She looked at the sky. The storm was beginning to thin at the eastern horizon, the clouds breaking in that particular way that preceded clearing. 2 hours, possibly 3, until the worst of it passed and aviation became viable. Before dawn, she said. She moved Tate to a defensible position, a natural depression in the rock with a clear line of sight east toward the approach route, where any rescue element would eventually come, and left him with the carbine, his sidearm, and clear instructions. Hold position. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Count time. Tate looked at the carbine, then at her. You're going back in alone. Yes. How many are left? Enough. He absorbed this without argument. She had come to appreciate that about him. He processed information and adjusted rather than fighting the shape of things. You should take the carbine, he said. I need you to be able to defend that position. The carbine stays with you. She checked his field dressing one more time, still holding, still appropriate pressure. If you hear sustained fire from the west, that's me working. If you hear it from the east, that's something else, and you move regardless of the leg. Understood. She looked at him for a moment. He was pale from blood loss and cold, but his eyes were steady. 23 years old. She had known people twice his age who would not have held together as well as this. You did well, she said. It was not something she said often. She meant it to be received accordingly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Then she went back into the forest alone. The enemy was now at 7, possibly 8. She had eliminated 2. The jammer position with its 2 operators was northeast. The command element at the relay station numbered 4, possibly reduced by the 2 she'd just taken. That left additional roving elements whose positions she needed to establish before she moved against any fixed point. She spent 40 minutes doing nothing but observing. It was the most important 40 minutes of the night. She moved in a wide arc, east to south to west, staying in the trees, watching the patterns of movement on the valley floor. She identified 2 additional patrol elements. A two-man team moving a slow circuit around the relay station perimeter, roughly 50 meters out, and a single individual positioned at the tree line's northern edge, watching the approach from the ridgeline. 7 total she could account for, plus command. The jammer was the priority. As long as it was operational, no radio call would reach anyone. She needed it down before she could expect any response to whatever weak signal Tate's radio might manage to project in a cleared window. She came at the jammer position from the north, downwind and downslope, using the sound of the storm still significant even as it declined to cover her movement. The 2 operators were inside the tarp shelter, one asleep and one awake, the awake one with his back to the opening and his eyes on the equipment. She came in fast and silent. 2 minutes later, the jammer unit had 3 rounds through its housing, which was perhaps 2 rounds more than strictly necessary, but she preferred certainty to economy when it came to communications equipment. She took the awake operator's radio, different model than the first, which told her they had layered communications. Good to know. She moved south. The patrol element circling the relay station was her next problem. 2 men, established rhythm, predictable interval. They were good enough to vary their pace slightly, bad enough that the variation had its own pattern after 3 cycles. She mapped it in her head during the 40 minutes of observation and found a point on their circuit where the route brought them both to the same side of a large spruce cluster, briefly, for perhaps 4 seconds. She set up at that point and waited. Cold had become something she was managing rather than feeling. The shoulder was a constant, manageable signal. She breathed in the 4-count rhythm her instructor had taught her when she was 22, in a very different kind of cold, in a classroom that felt like another life. The first man came around the spruce cluster, then the second. For approximately 3 seconds they were both in her line of sight. She fired twice in immediate succession, shifting aim between shots by practice muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Both men went down, 4 rounds remaining. She did the arithmetic of the situation. 4 rounds against approximately 4 remaining operational personnel, plus a command element whose full number she still didn't have with certainty. This was a disadvantageous ratio in any conventional sense. She did not approach it conventionally. The man at the northern tree line was next, but not by direct engagement. She used him. She moved east until she was behind his position, then deliberately and very carefully made noise. Not human noise, not voices or movement, but the specific sharp crack of a branch underweight that could have been animal or could have been human. She made it twice, then stopped and went completely still. The man turned north. He keyed his radio and spoke. She heard the response on the radio she'd taken from the jammer position. Acknowledging. 2 units responding, moving from the relay station area north to investigate. She had drawn 2 people away from the command element. She moved south toward the relay station. The relay station's interior light was still on. She came in from the west, low, using the shadow thrown by the structure itself. There were boot prints around the entrance, recent, multiple, but she could account for most of them now. The 2 she'd drawn north, the 2 patrol elements she'd eliminated, the 2 she'd taken in the trees near Tate, that left the command element and whatever security he kept close. She went to the window she'd observed through before. The tape had been adjusted. Someone had noticed the gap and sealed it more carefully. She moved to the northeast corner of the building and found a second window, smaller, set high in the wall. She stood on a buried foundation block and looked through the gap at the bottom of the frame. The man she'd marked as command was alone, almost alone. 1 guard inside, near the door. The documents on the table were being packed into a hard case, flat, black, military standard. The man with iron gray hair was methodical about it, careful, in no apparent hurry. He operated like a man who had calculated his timeline and found it acceptable. She studied him. He was not what she had expected, and she had not let herself expect much. He had the bearing of someone who had once operated at her level, the compact efficiency of motion, the habit of pausing to listen before moving between positions, which told her he understood the architecture of what was happening outside his walls. He knew something was reducing his team. He had heard the shots. He was not afraid. He was adapting. She watched him go still in the middle of packing the case. He stood upright and turned not toward her window but in the opposite direction, toward the door, and she understood with a cold, certain clarity that he had heard the 2 units she'd drawn north fail to return. He had been counting. He had done the same arithmetic she had. He spoke to the guard. She couldn't hear the words through the wall, but she read the intent. They were changing the plan. Not running the extraction window wasn't there yet, but repositioning. Moving the case. Possibly moving him to a more defensible location within the structure. She made a decision. She moved to the door. This was not doctrine. Doctrine was distance, patience, the long angle. But the case being moved changed the geometry of everything. If it left this building before dawn, before any extraction response could arrive, whatever information it contained, the intelligence that had gotten her team killed, the proof of the internal compromise that had staged this operation, would disappear. She moved to the entrance side of the building, stacked at the door's edge, and listened. Movement inside. 1 set of footsteps, light and quick. The guard, repositioning. The heavier, measured pace of the command element. She waited for the light tread to come toward the door. It did. When the door opened, she was already moving. The guard was fast and well trained. He got a hand on her weapon and very nearly made it matter. She had the shoulder compromising her left arm, which meant the grapple was not clean, and for approximately 4 seconds the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Then it wasn't. She held for 6 seconds, listening. The building was quiet. She entered. The man with the iron gray hair was standing in the center of the room with his hands at his sides, and he was looking at her with a particular expression of someone who has solved a problem and does not entirely like the answer. "One operator," he said. His English was unaccented, American, which was its own information. "I thought it might be one." "Put the case on the table," she said. "You're the sniper from the ridge." The one they said went down the slope. The case. He considered her for a moment. Then he set the case on the table, very carefully, and stepped back. "The 2 you sent north won't be coming back," he said. "They're reliable but not exceptional. I should have kept them here." He said it without bitterness. A straightforward tactical assessment. "Who sent you? Put your hands on the table." "Someone sent your team here on bad intelligence. You know that. Someone inside your structure." He put his hands on the table, flat, as instructed. "I can tell you who." She kept the weapon on him and moved to the case. She didn't open it. She needed it intact. "I'm sure you can," she said. "That doesn't interest you?" "Not from you." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to hold this position until extraction." "Yes. My remaining 2 operators will come back when I don't report." "They'll come. I'll hear them before they reach the door." She moved to a position that gave her the door, the window, and him in a single sight line. "Sit down." He sat. Outside, the storm had gone almost entirely quiet. She heard them at 400 meters. Not both of them, one of them. The other had learned something from the losses of the night and was moving carefully, using the tree cover, keeping his footsteps in the compressed snow channels between drifts where boot falls made less sound. She had learned more. She left command secured, his hands fastened behind the chair with the strap from the jammer equipment she'd taken, and she moved outside into the pre-dawn dark. The storm was over. The sky above the eastern ridge had gone from black to a deep, bruised blue, and the mountains were emerging from the night in stages, their upper faces catching the first horizontal light before the valley floor below. The air was absolutely still. This was the most dangerous kind of cold. Storm cold had noise and movement to compete with. Calm cold had nothing. Every sound traveled perfectly and forever. She moved north along the building's exterior wall and went flat at the northwest corner. She could hear the careful one now too. He was good. He was moving in the compression channels like she'd anticipated, but good wasn't enough when the air was this clear and this still. She could hear the specific pitch of his boot sole pressing into crystallized snow, the sound that snow makes at -15 degrees Celsius, different from the sound it makes at 5 below, different again from the sound at the exact transition between the two, and she had spent enough time in cold to know the difference without thinking about it. He was at her 2 o'clock. The less careful one was at her 11, she assessed. The less careful one would arrive first, but would also announce himself in the last 30 meters and give her a reaction window. The careful one was the priority. She needed to take him before he had a position, because once he had a position in the tree line to the north, she would not be able to locate him again until it was too late. She moved east, paralleling the tree line, staying low, using the building's shadow as long as it lasted and then using the shadow of the terrain itself. She was fully exposed for approximately 8 seconds, crossing the open ground between the building and the first trees, and she moved through it at a pace that was not slow and not fast but precise, the pace of someone who has calculated the risk and accepted it. She entered the trees, stopped, put her hand on the snow. There the compression. 20 meters, slightly east of north. He had come off the approach trail and was moving laterally to find a flanking position. He was good. He was also, she realized, doing exactly what she would have done. She moved to intercept. At 10 meters she could see him, a shadow among shadows, moving in a low, careful crouch. She saw him pause. She saw him look at the tree where she had passed, because she had passed through a gap in the canopy and left a brief, very slight disturbance in the frost on the branches. He was reading her. She fired. 3 rounds remaining. The second man, the less careful one, was running now. She heard him in the open ground south of the trees, heading away, not toward the building but away from it, east toward the valley slope, running. She let him go. She could not spend rounds on a fleeing target she might need elsewhere, and a man running east in an open snowfield at dawn was a problem for whoever arrived on extraction. She went back inside. The iron gray man was still in his chair. He had not made a serious attempt at the restraint. She checked the strap and found it barely tested. He had calculated, correctly, that breaking free in a dark building with an unknown number of threats outside was not a better position than waiting. "It's done," she said. He looked at her with something that was not quite respect and not quite its absence. "The 2 from the north?" "Yes." "And Gregor?" "If Gregor was the careful one, yes." A pause. "He was the best I had." "I know." She had known it from the way he moved. She went to the table and put her hand on the case and kept it there until the sky outside the window turned from deep blue to the first flat gray of morning. The extraction helicopter arrived at 0647. She heard it at 0631, the specific rotor cadence of a military transport, and she went to the door and fired a single round straight up to mark the position. 2 rounds remaining after that. She wanted them to know before they were close enough to mistake the situation. They landed in the open grounds south of the relay station. 4 men in heavy winter gear, weapons raised, moving in a professional spread toward the structure. She stood in the doorway with her hands visible and her weapon slung and waited. The lead figure stopped at 15 meters. He stared at her. She recognized him after a moment. Warrant Officer Frank Stellan, who had been her first assigned spotter 3 years ago before his transfer to the aviation element. He had a beard now. She did not know what she had that she hadn't had then. "Boss," he said. "Stellan, we got a faint signal from a radio in this grid about 90 minutes ago. We thought it might be." He stopped, looking past her into the structure, at the man in the chair, at the case on the table, at the evidence of everything that had happened in the hours between dark and dawn. "What happened here?" "My team was ambushed. I recovered Corporal Tate. He's east, approximately 2 kilometers on the slope, needs immediate medical for a leg wound. 2 additional team members I need you to find along the western ridge." She paused. "The others are gone." Stellan was still processing the scene. "How many of them?" "The case on the table needs to go to counterintelligence. Don't open it here. The man in the chair is cooperative." She had not tested this claim rigorously, but he had had opportunities to complicate things and had not taken them. "There is one fleeing east on the valley floor who needs to be found before he reaches cover." Stellan looked at her for a long moment. "You did all of this alone?" She did not answer. The answer was in the room. The counterintelligence debrief took 3 days. Elena gave her account twice, once verbally, and once in a written form that was collected and sealed. She answered every question without elaboration and without emotion, and she did not ask questions in return, though she had several. On the 4th day, Captain Derek Halstead appeared at the door of the holding room where she had been waiting. She had not known whether he had survived. She had not been told. No one had volunteered the information, and she had not asked. He was alive. She could see his left arm was in a sling and his face had the particular tightness of someone who had spent time in a hospital bed thinking very specific thoughts. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came in and sat across from her. "Connolly and Dufresne made it to the western tree line," he said. Dufresne took a round through the hand. "Connolly is intact." He paused. "UN is gone. I'm sorry." She absorbed this. "The case contained communication records," Halstead continued. "Going back 14 months, the operation was designed to destroy the unit and recover certain intelligence about a supply route we'd been monitoring. The compromise was at the scheduling level. Someone in the administrative chain gave them the operational window." He looked at the table. "Someone has been arrested. I can't tell you who. I don't need to know." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "The Directorate wants to recommend you for the Distinguished Service Cross." Elena said nothing. "There's a problem," Halstead continued. "The operation is classified. The full scope of it. The award would have to be processed at that level, which means it doesn't matter." Halstead looked at her directly then. He had the expression of a man who had prepared several things to say and was now uncertain whether any of them were adequate. "I made an error," he said finally, "before the operation. The team climate I allowed, it didn't affect my performance." "No," he agreed, "it didn't." He seemed to find this harder than anything else in the conversation. "I misjudged you." Elena looked at the table. "You misjudged what you were looking at," she said. "It's a different mistake." He didn't fully understand the distinction. She didn't expect him to. Some understanding came with time, and some of it required the specific kind of dark that she had been standing in alone for most of a night. She stood. The debrief was finished. Everything that could be filed had been filed. "Is there anything you need?" Halstead said. She considered this genuinely, the way she considered every question. "No," she said, and she meant it completely. The base at Fairbanks had a walkway behind the operations building that faced north, and in the early morning the mountains were visible in full clarity. The storm system that had taken 3 days to build, and 1 night to break, now completely gone. The sky, the particular clean blue of extreme cold and extreme altitude. Elena stood on the walkway in her uniform, without a weapon for the first time in 4 days, and looked at the mountains. The door opened behind her. She heard the footsteps, 2 sets, Halstead and someone she didn't recognize by gait. Someone new, and then they stopped and the door closed again, and she understood she was alone, after all, that whoever it was had seen her there and chosen not to interrupt. She was grateful for that. She thought about UN. She thought about the specific weight of information that his death created. The gap in the structure of people she had known, small enough that some would not notice it for a long time and large enough that she felt it now as a physical thing. A specific gravity in her chest. She thought about the man with the iron gray hair. He was in a facility somewhere south of here, being asked careful questions by careful people. She would not be called to testify. The case would resolve without her, in rooms that did not require her presence, and the name of the person who had sold the operational window 14 months of careful harm would appear in a document that she would never read. She thought about Tate, who was in a medical bay 2 buildings over, his leg wound properly attended to, his family presumably contacted by now. He had asked her, when Stellan's team brought him in on a stretcher, and she was standing in the snow watching, one simple question. Was it worth it? He'd said. She had thought about it seriously. The mission objective had been a recon sweep that turned into an ambush, that turned into a defensive action that had cost a man's life and 3 people's injuries. The information in the case was valuable. The compromise had been identified. But Ewan was dead, and she was standing in the snow with 2 rounds left in a borrowed weapon, and the mission objective had never been completed as briefed. "I don't know yet," she had said. He had nodded at this, which told her he'd understood it as an honest answer rather than an evasion. She stood on the walkway and looked at the mountains for a long time. A crow landed on the railing 6 feet to her right and examined her with the black, lateral intelligence of its eye. She looked at it. It looked at her, then it opened its wings and was gone, out over the snowfield, a single black mark against the white. She watched it go until she couldn't see it anymore. She thought about what she would tell the next team she was assigned to, if she told them anything at all. She thought about the standard questions that would come: "Are you ready? Are you squared away?" questions that were really asking, "Did what happened to you break something we should be concerned about?" She had an answer already. The same answer she always had. It was a short answer, and it was true, and it closed the subject without drama. She had learned early that the people who spent the most time explaining their fitness were frequently the least fit. The people who were genuinely fine went back to work. The work was the proof. She was also tired, and the tiredness was the clean, specific kind that came after something real had been done, not the hollow grinding kind that came from stasis and not being used the way you were capable of being used. She breathed in the cold air once, deliberately, the way she breathed when she was setting up a shot, filling her lungs, registering the temperature against her throat. Everything working, everything functional. Then she turned and went back inside. She had reports to file, equipment to return, a debrief summary to review and sign. Small, specific tasks, the kind that did not require anything from her beyond attention and accuracy, and she had plenty of both. In the hallway, Corporal James Dufresne was coming toward her, his right hand in a compression wrap, his expression the complex one that people wore when they had something to say and did not entirely know how to begin. She let him have a moment with it. "I want you to know," he said finally, "that I told Halstead from the first day that he had the dynamic wrong. I want you to know that." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. He seemed surprised. "How? You weren't working against me." That was enough to tell me everything else. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. "Your assessment of the pace on the approach, that was correct. Connolly wouldn't." "I know." Dufresne was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't want anyone to apologize to you?" "No." "Why?" She thought about how to answer this in a way that was true and brief, and left nothing false behind. "Because apology is about the person giving it," she said. "I've got other things to think about." He nodded slowly. "What happens next for you?" "Another assignment." "Where?" She allowed herself a very slight smile. It came and went quickly. "Somewhere cold," she said. She walked to the operations office and sat at a desk in a chair that was slightly too tall for her, and she pulled the first form toward her. And she began to write. Each line was precise and factual, stripped of everything that was not essential. The same discipline she applied to every other kind of work she did. Outside, the mountains were enormous and white and completely still. The storm had passed. The snow remembered everything.